What time of the day was it when the attack came?
8 in the evening.
Evening?
Mm-hmm.
And how long ago was it? Oh, yeah, the clock, right. Yeah.
The same, the day before Osama bin Laden was killed.
Yeah. Oh, the day?
The day before.
Day before.
Security apparatus, and with the release of prisoners, crime spread, such as violations, killing, kidnapping, rape, the execution of detainees, and armed rebels committed crimes against humanity. In the square of the city of Masrata, 200 kilometers east of Tripoli, after controlling the city, rebels committed heinous crimes by cutting the limbs of a soldier. They cut off his heart and trampled it. In Benghazi, east of Libya, the situation was not better. Rebels committed cold-blooded crimes. A war prisoner was cut in pieces, and among the heinous crimes which were carried out in the public square was opposite to the Benghazi court, the seat of the Transitional National Council. These images document the execution of a Libyan soldiers after being tortured and decapitated by the sword. All of this is beginning to carried out in the building next to the court, where the information indicates that the basement of the building is being used as a prison. It goes for interrogation and torture until death.
Get the time.
What is it?
8 o'clock.
ومعمر وليبيا بس ومعمر وليبيا بس لا تصدق لا تصدق من الحي وترزق من تشاء بغير حساب الله No, Obama, no.
Good evening, and welcome to More Room on the Outside. I'm your host, Baruch. And as you've seen in the footage just as we opened up the program this evening, you're seeing the footage that you don't get on CNN or ABC, CBS, and other major networks, if you want to call them that. You're getting footage raw, as we would present it to you here at DCTV in such a way that you would be able to see the truth about what is taking place there in Libya. We were on just a couple of days ago as we were listening to the Honorable Cynthia McKinney, and later to listen to Dr. Randy Short as he explained and talked to us about what is going on that we're not getting. The truth has been assassinated, and we're listening to a story as it needs to be told by corporate America in order to make it make sense, in order to keep us on the side of continuing to drop bombs on innocent people. It's a shame and it's an atrocity. My name is Dr. Baruch, and this evening we're going to be interviewing a gentleman who traveled there with the Honorable Cynthia McKinney. He got a chance to see it, and he's going to tell us what he saw. And he's not just a youngster to journalism. He's not a youngster to going out and recording what's going on in the world around us. In fact, he's been a journalist for many years. We're going to get a little bit of information about him before we get into our program this evening. And we'll start by asking Mr. Wayne Madsen, who are you?
I'm an investigative journalist. You know, there used to be a time here in Washington when we had people like Jack Anderson, and before him, Drew Pearson. We were called muckraking journalists. And unfortunately, the conglomeration of corporate media, we don't have that much anymore. Now there's a lot on the web, but there's a lot of stuff on the web, let's face it. But as far as real, insightful, take no prisoners, investigative journalism, there's not a whole lot of folks around anymore. So I'm trying to keep the spirit of Anderson and Pearson, even going back before them, Ida Tarbell and many others alive, because we all know why freedom of press was put in the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, by the founders, and it was so that we have an informed public. Sure. And with all the nonsense coming out of CNN and the other corporate controlled media, I was sitting in Tripoli on that delegation with Cynthia McKinney, reading wire service dispatches from Tripoli that are absolutely 180 degrees out from what I was witnessing on the ground. So this is an example. So you take this type of environment, take it to Baghdad, take it to Afghanistan, take it to Gaza, and you obviously see what the corporate media is doing. They're not only they're not only missing important stories, but they are absolutely misreporting important stories, and I think that's where the combination can really come in.
So I take it you're in the process of correcting the misrepresentation of the truth?
Well, there was one major thing. We went to El Qadra Hospital in Tripoli, saw a number of wounded civilians. Now, this is back when NATO was reporting that they were not killing or hurting civilians, that their targets in Tripoli, other parts of western Libya and in eastern Libya were merely military targets. But it was clear, talking to people who were history teachers, grocery store owners, civilian drivers, that this was these people had been hit with shrapnel from NATO missile and bombing attacks, and clearly these were civilians who were being targeted. So after left Libya, now we have NATO finally having to admit that they are targeting civilians, including children. We knew even before the NATO admission. We went to the Gaddafi, one of his residences, actually the residence of his son, who was killed there. Saif al-Arab Gaddafi. They also killed his 3 grandchildren. Mm-hmm. So we saw the rubble. You could actually, some of the body parts were still under the rubble. It was clear from the smell that this was a few weeks later, but that people had been killed there. And still the media was reporting that these were allegations being made by the Libyan government, even though those reporters were taken from their hotel in Tripoli to the same site we saw and said these were merely unsubstantiated allegations, when it was clear that this was a residence, swing set, foosball table, nothing of any military value there.
Wow. And tell me, how did you get the ticket? How did you get the chance to? Who called you up? And why do you think you were there?
Well, I've known Cynthia McKinney for a number of years. Okay. Actually, we became acquainted back when I wrote a book called Genocide and Covert Operations in Africa in 1993 to 1999, where I investigated the Rwanda situation, the genocide. But what triggered the genocide, the shooting down of an airplane carrying the presidents of Rwanda and Burundi, both of whom were killed, members of their staff. At first, that was reported as an accident. Later, it was clear that it was shot down by missiles. Later, it became even clearer that the missiles were fired by forces loyal to Paul Kagame, the dictator in Rwanda? Who's our ally? So the idea that the French were behind it, the Belgians were behind it, was not true. The people who were behind it were those who wanted to destabilize the great region of Africa, to have a reason to establish a beachhead in Rwanda, and then go on to basically then Zaire, later the Democratic Republic of Congo. And the results of that, 6 million people dead there. So that's where we became acquainted. I was considered out there on the limb on that story, but people like Cynthia McKinney believed what I was telling and writing about was true, and that's where, and we became acquainted then. And since then, it's been a series of investigations of wars, including Iraq debacle, 9/11, and all these other things that are totally misreported by the media.
I was just getting some news, because I've been seeing news out on my Facebook and other mediums to let people know who I'm interviewing and what we're going to be talking about. And I mentioned the name, I mentioned about Al-Qaeda in Libya. And I was sent a whole lot of information about this guy, William Tarpley, I think it is. I don't know whether you're familiar. Webster Tarpley. And his claim that, of course, that America has been supplying arms and support to Al-Qaeda there in Libya. Is there truth to that?
Well, absolutely. You saw in the clip before we just had shown these individuals committing these atrocities, beheadings, awful things. I saw it also on Libyans who had come from Benghazi to Tripoli, who had video on their phones. And they were gruesome beheadings, not that beheading, other beheadings. And there is a Salafist element in eastern Libya. There are some places where Islamic Emirates have been declared. Now, we know that Saudi Arabia is supplying some of these forces with weapons. We know because the U.S. had asked them. That report was made a few months ago. And also that the United Arab Emirates and Qatar are supplying assistance to the rebels as well. Well, it's quite clear that these extreme Wahhabist Islamists are active. When Gaddafi said Al-Qaeda was active in eastern Libya, a lot of people laughed him off. And, well, maybe he shouldn't have said Al-Qaeda, because I personally think Al-Qaeda is a brand. It seems to have as many franchises as Chick-fil-A. We've got Al-Qaeda here, Al-Qaeda there, Al-Qaeda everywhere. But these are definitely Salafists. These are definitely people who are ingrained with the more radical elements. Many of these individuals wear Afghan headgear. They are veterans of Afghanistan. Some are out of Iraq, others out of Yemen. Some were released from Guantanamo, now are active with the rebels in eastern Libya. And now women who live in places in the east under their control are required to wear their full burqa when they leave their home. So it's quite clear what the tendency is of the rebels, and the U.S. is supporting them. When we claim we're supposedly fighting these elements, but we know from the uprisings in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia and other countries in the Arabian Peninsula that we support these elements. We're not fighting against Al-Qaeda. As a matter of fact, I believe Al-Qaeda has always been an instrument of U.S. intelligence going back to the war against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan.
So who are we then? You know, as I listen to this, it sounds like we're complicit with all the evil that is out there in the world. Who is us? And then how do you differentiate, how do you separate yourself from that? Because you're over there and you probably look like an American.
Oh,
right?
absolutely. They knew we were Americans. And you know, I was wondering how we'd be received. You saw there was those pro-Gaddafi demonstrations at the Gaddafi military compound, which has taken so many hits, NATO and Tripoli. But when they found out we were Americans, they were very friendly because they knew we were there to get the truth. And at first I said, my God, bombing the country. But yeah, we say we. When we talk about the United States, United States, it's the Pentagon, it's the CIA. CIA is nothing more than an instrument of Wall Street. One thing that has not gotten much attention is in 2008, $1.3 billion was basically stolen by Goldman Sachs from the Libyan Sovereign Wealth Fund. They said they lost most of it. Well, it's not clear that they lose that kind of money. They stole, probably reinvested it in other operations. But after all the years of the CIA and their slush fund activity, their involvement with drugs and drug smuggling, and banks like BCCI and Nugan Hand and Stanford International and all, and this continues to this day. We know that when we talk about who's behind these uprisings, assassinations, wars, we're talking about that confluence between the CIA, Wall Street, the Pentagon, and these elitist groups that run this country. When in fact, the American people no beef with the Libyan people, and we see moves in Congress that are saying, "Wait a minute, why are we in this yet another war? And why is it U.S. bombs are always being used against Arabs and Muslims? The only wars we're involved with now, the targets are Arabs and Muslims, Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen, Pakistan, and now Libya, and probably other places we don't know about, like Somalia. We're actively involved where we have uprisings in Bahrain, where we have a U.S. naval base. There's no move to establish a no-fly zone over Bahrain. Certainly there's no move to establish one over Gaza, where the poor people were being massacred by the Israelis, and still are. They're being squeezed economically. And the other thing I saw in Libya, life is normal except for the long gas lines. Now, keep in mind that Libya is a producer of oil.
Right.
Before the sanctions were imposed, it was getting gas in Tripoli. But now there's long lines, and anyone who remembers the gas shortage in the 1970s, they thought there were long lines. Well, some of these lines are miles long. So there is a policy by NATO of collective punishment of the Libyan people. It even is affecting fishing boats trying to leave to catch fish to bring back to sell in Tripoli. They're interdicted by NATO naval vessels. This is much like what happens in Gaza with collective punishment of the people of Gaza by Israel. We're seeing collective punishment of the people of Libya by NATO right now. And one has to ask, what was authorized by the UN Security Council Resolution 1973? No. And we had President Obama using this Security Council resolution to basically ignore the War Powers Act, which expired this past Sunday, and he's continuing with this war in Libya against the wishes of Congress.
And those of you in the viewing audience are getting a chance to see, again, more of the footage as was captured just recently. And we're talking about what, in the last 2 or 3 weeks, right?
Yeah, we were there about 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, and you're getting a chance to see that. And again, it seems as though the life, as you said, it was pretty normal, except that people were expressing their concern. You know, you saw the young say, no, Obama, no. That obviously he's wanting Obama to stop whatever he's doing. And of course the perception is, and the reality is, that he's the one that's contributing and supporting the dropping of bombs there, as he's articulated even himself. That he supports this campaign. You being historian to an extent, you've been capturing the story in Rwanda and other stories. But what is really the truth, or what is the real pursuit in all of this? Why Gaddafi? Why Libya? And why is America so headstrong after the country?
We have to go back. In 2003, Gaddafi made an agreement with the Bush administration and with the United Nations to turn over all of his stockpiles of so-called weapons of mass destruction, which were basically chemical weapons. And he did so. And what hasn't been destroyed has been under guard by Libyan forces under agreement with the U.S. and the United Nations. And that was one concern raised while we were there. There was an environmental conference going on in Tripoli on the effects of this war on the environment. And one chemical engineer came up to me and very emphatically said, those military bases NATO's bombing are adjacent to the warehouses where the stockpiles are being stored, awaiting destruction, being protected by Libyan security forces under agreement with the U.S. and UN. And his fear was if these Salafist elements of the rebels gain control and the Libyan forces are dispersed, if they get control over these warehouses, they would be able to sell that stuff, including mustard gas, in the black market or turn them over to ferries. So here the United States is supposed to be against the proliferation of these WMDs, and yet we're bombing the security support bases that are protecting these stockpiles until the UN and the U.S. can destroy them. So you got to wonder what is the end game here? There's also the fact that Colonel Gaddafi he was a big supporter of Pan-Africanism to the point where he was looking at the economic situation on the continent and saying, look, maybe it's time to disengage from the and go to a African currency unit backed by gold, and that would destroy something called the CFA franc, which is always used by France as a mechanism to maintain economic control over its former colonies in West and Central Africa. Well, the French heard that, and of course that's a threat to the imperialistic designs or colonialist designs. So who was the first person who recognized the rebels? The person who urged NATO to attack Libya was Nicolas Sarkozy, the French president. I think this played an awful lot to it. And let's get back to what Saif al-Islam Gaddafi's son, had to say on Libyan TV. He said, listen, Sarkozy, after he became friendly with Gaddafi, asked for campaign contributions for his presidential run. Now, that's the same year we have 1.3 billion disappearing from Goldman Sachs, the sovereign wealth fund of Libya. Many questions were raised. Did some of this money go in to support people like Sarkozy? Because one of the first targets of NATO in Tripoli was the anti-corruption agency that was investigating the loss of the $1.3 billion, in addition to some government ministers who were thought to be dipping into the oil revenue, siphoning it off for their own Swiss bank accounts, and almost to a person, these ministers all defected to the rebels. So we had the Western media saying, look, Gaddafi's losing all of his ministers, they're all defecting to the rebels, but they were all under investigation, and the anti-corruption agency was the first one of the first targets in the NATO attacks, obviously spurred on the French, who have and Mr. Sarkozy has a lot afraid of if any of these files are ever released. They assured me in Libya that, yes, they hit the agency, but we have the files backed up.
Great. Now, my question, because I know you're doing your reporting, you're asking questions, you're taking pictures, you're seeing things that you want to come back here and tell us, was CNN or the BBC?
The Washington Post, New York Times, I have to assume CNN, they're all ensconced with the International Press Corps at the Rixos Hotel in Tripoli. That's not the hotel where we stayed at. But what happens is these are individuals who go from war to war, and they tend to basically, not embedded certainly with U.S. military, but they're certainly embedded with the U.S. and NATO propaganda effort. So the Libyan government will take them out to various sites, show them the sites, and then they'll immediately report, well, we're being used by the Libyans. These are staged. They're putting missile batteries next to residential areas. That's why residential. So they're giving the NATO line, but that's essentially what you have with the international media in Tripoli. None of them going out on their own. They say they're controlled. I wasn't controlled. I could go anywhere. They're claiming that, but it's not true.
Sure. Wow. And as you all were there, what were some of the more memorable events that took place?
Well, I guess from a personal standpoint, the hotel where we stayed, which was right at the beachfront in Tripoli, the Corinthian Hotel, every night there's a no-fly zone in Libya. Every night, standing outside, you would hear the jets, and these were not commercial airplanes.
Right.
These are NATO jets. You could hear them, you couldn't see them, and then all of a sudden you'd hear it first. You'd hear the rumble, and then you'd see off in the distance the glow. Usually they were hitting the Libyan military compound, which where Gaddafi used to live, and that was not too far from our hotel. So then in the room, during the evening, you would feel the room shake.
Wow. We're talking again to Mr. Wayne Madsen, and he's sharing with us his recent experience there in Tripoli, or in Libya, and getting a perspective that we're not going to get from the other news mediums. We're going to be right back as we continue this conversation. Please stay tuned for more Room on the Outside. We'll be right back.
Excuse me. سيف العرب. Special room, that's سيف العرب. to sleep here. أنا كنت في هذا المكان بالضبط.
So he's glad that some of the stories are out at least.
Yes, the story is going to get out even more.
عندكم 17 ديسك انتم 17 ديسك خليهم يشوفوهم خليهم ينقلوا للعالم شو فيه
الصبح ورينا كانت معنا هي تشتغل معنا كانت
What time of the day was it when the attack came?
8 in the evening.
Evening? And how long ago was it? Oh yeah, the clock, right. Yeah.
The same, the day before Osama bin Laden was killed.
Yeah.
Oh, the day
The day before.
before.
Yeah.
Right, you remember?
That was the video coverage.
It was the step on.
Yeah.
He was at the
قبل أسامة بن لادن بيوم
Obama. He couldn't make a comment
فيلم
because he was
داروه
at the
بس
press
يغطوا
club.
على
And then that night he was busy orchestrating
Yeah.
Osama bin Laden's
Yeah.
assassination.
Yeah.
So he couldn't make a comment.
Press dinner.
There was no
That's
comment
right. He was at
on
the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and he was yucking it up with all those
Yes.
idiots.
So there was no comment
Yeah.
on the death of Gaddafi's
Yeah.
son or grandchildren.
Right.
Nothing. انتهى أسامة بن لادن لماذا لم ينتهي الشباب؟
Was there?
لماذا لم يخرجوا من العالم؟ لم يسمى
بن لادن it's dead.
Yeah.
Why the terrorism is not stopped?
لماذا من
Because we
من العراق
we run them.
باكستان
جاوب
لماذا؟
قال لك لنا احنا
Al Qaeda, Al CIA.
قال لك القاعدة هي CIA الإخبارات الأمريكية.
Yes.
لا من رعرع أسامة بن لادن من تربية من تلمذة من أسامة بن لادن
يس هو قالها
ولا أنتم أنشأت ولا أنشأوا الأمريكان أسامة بن لادن لا نقصد القيادة عندهم يعني جهزوه ضد روسيا في أفغانستان
مين أسامة بن لادن روسيا
انتهى أسامة بن لادن ارفعوا ايديكم
Are you guys?
Is checking out as Mr. Wayne Madsen was talking. You got to be careful who you say is us and we when you talk about who's dropping bombs and who's doing what there in Libya. Our program this evening is dedicated to bringing out the truth as it relates to what's really taking place there in Libya, what's going on with Gaddafi, what's going on with the American or the U.S. and NATO alliance and participation in this war campaign against those people. We're honored to have in our studio someone who's just come back from Libya, Mr. Wayne Madsen, who is an investigative journalist, has been doing so for many, many years, has brought the truth out in many instances. His life is probably threatened, you know, to say the least, as you start bringing out the truth in the midst of corporate liars. Well, I have a question, Mr. Madsen, and my question is about the ethnic cleansing. I had heard that there was ethnic cleansing, and the ethnicity that was being cleansed was those of the darker hue, those who might be the lower end wage earners, you might say. Why don't you tell us what your experience was and what you know about that?
Well, there is ethnic cleansing, and it is being carried out by certain elements of the rebels. The rebels largely are from the eastern part of Libya, capital Benghazi, the province known as Cyrenaica. Many of these rebels are of Berber descent, and we know there's always been racial strife between the Berbers and those from black countries in Africa, but also there's black Libyans. They're native to Libya. So we have two groups. We have the native Libyans who are there. They're full Libyan citizens. One thing about Gaddafi, he's a lot like Fidel Castro. Everyone's equal. Doesn't matter the color of one's skin. Everyone's equal. Everyone gets to share in the oil revenue. Every family in Libya got $500 a month in oil revenue sharing. It's quite clear if the rebels take over, that probably will go because the oil companies will get almost all that revenue and they won't share anything. But then Colonel Gaddafi had invited into Libya several million guest workers from countries like Burkina Faso, Niger, Cameroon, Guinea, Ghana, Nigeria. And they were working there in construction jobs. There was a huge construction effort in Libya just as this invasion and these attacks started. Even a new metro system had been installed in Tripoli. It hadn't even gotten underway yet. The J.W. Marriott had opened up a new hotel that had only been open for a couple days before the NATO attack started, and then they closed. But so there's a lot of construction jobs, a lot of service jobs, and these guest workers were working in those jobs. So when the rebels took over in eastern Libya, they this information saying that these individuals, not only the black Libyan citizens, but also the guest workers were mercenaries hired by Gaddafi to keep him in power. So it's all the atrocities, the hangings, the beheadings, the hacking of people with swords. Women were raped, children were murdered, and many of these guest workers, of course, then fled into neighboring Egypt and also into Tunisia. Because of the air embargo, we came into Tripoli by car from the Tunisian border. The minute we got close to the border with Libya on the Tunisian side, we saw the refugee camp. Clearly, all these people were the guest workers from all over West Africa and places like Eritrea and Ethiopia and other countries who feared for their lives when the rebels took over. Mm-hmm. And they're not living in these squalid refugee camps. Another striking thing, we took a plane from Tunis to Jerba and then took ground transportation again and go to Tripoli. We had to stay overnight in a tourist hotel because Jerba and south of Jerba is known as a tourist haven for basically European holidaymakers. We saw all these UN and not NGO organizations. There were people parked in the hotel, poolside, on their laptops, drinking their cold Heineken, Tunisian side, because there's Gaddafi's banned alcohol in Libya. Officially, I think it can be had there, but and it was quite clear it was 100 miles from those refugee camps. So these NGO workers, I call it the misery industry. I saw it in Kigali, Rwanda. What they do is they just descend on these places that have had terrible human rights catastrophes. They're on salary. They're getting paid as international civil servants, and they're living it up. Mm. And they go. It's almost like they go where the disasters and the catastrophes are, the human rights catastrophes. And I saw it once again. And instead of being out there in these camps and making sure these people were being fed, they were back at the hotel, basically living a good life as anyone on the German and French holidaymakers, Muslim pensioners, were there on cheap holidays with these NGO people, these World Food Program, UNICEF, you name it. They're all there. That's very stark to me, but not a surprise. I had seen it before. Coming out of Libya, we saw a number of these people from the Tunisian side start to head back into Libya because the Libyan government had set up a number call. Look, if you want to come back to Libya, we'll give you housing, we'll give you financial assistance, come on back, things are fine. And everything was fine from the Tunisian border to Tripoli. We saw no sign of rebel activity. We saw signs of previous rebel activity back in March and back in February when the rebellion first started against Gaddafi. And it's almost like maybe these elements were inserted by NATO, U.S. forces in these communities to cause problems because it was quite there was no support for the rebels, at least where we had been, from the local population. But this is typical. We've seen this before. We saw this with the Contras in Nicaragua. We've seen this time and time again, where the CIA will insert exiles, mercenaries into an environment to cause problems, to create mayhem, and try to stir up the people into a rebellion or a revolution. Leaving, of course, Libya, going back into Tunisia, this automatic gunfire started at the border. And that's always kind of, when you're especially, you've cleared Libyan immigration, you're waiting to clear Tunisian, you hear automatic gunfire. Apparently the Tunisians had opened up on some of these people crossing the border. Wow. Some still coming in, hadn't heard, some going back. So this is the situation. There's a huge refugee crisis on the Tunisian-Libyan border, as there is on the border with Egypt.
And I take it you get many invitations to come on the networks to your side of the story.
I used to, but that ended a long time ago. I used to be regular on Fox News, for example. But I guess they got tired of me yelling back and giving O'Reilly and Sean Kennedy as much as I could give.
That's interesting. We're listening to Mr. Wayne Madsen, and he's sharing with us his story as he sees it and as he saw it in Libya, and not only but from the perspective of someone who's been there on the continent of Africa and probably all throughout the world. It's really a shame, and it's important that you and the listening audience and the viewing audience understand that we're giving this information to you to empower you, not so that you can just know, but so now we can be active and we can begin to move forward on getting the truth. Because, who's to say it's not going to be us one day?
Well, that's true. I mean, it's quite clear that the media has done an awful job over this. It's not happened overnight. It's a gradual thing. What they're reporting as news is not news, and what they should be reporting, they're ignoring.
Wow. Okay. So you were there how long?
We were there for about 4 days in total. We lost a day coming in. We were supposed to be there 5, but we were there about a full 4 days.
Okay. And you have, as you said, you've written some, or you've gotten at least some work prepared to be distributed through mediums. Where do we find your work?
Yes, I have a website, WayneMadsenReport.com. That's all together, WayneMadsen report.com. So I've got my reports there, but people have taken those reports and put them on other websites. So you'll find the dispatches from Libya on probably about a dozen or 2 dozen websites right now.
Okay. And as you're putting this new word, or you're putting this truth out, who's listening and who's responding and who's taking action in favor of what's right?
Well, there is a lot of activism now around the United States. Cynthia McKinney, by the way, will be speaking on June 24th at the Festival Center, the Morgan area at 7 p.m., along with some other people. I'll be there, and she'll be basically telling people what she saw and what she heard. She stayed there a lot longer than we did. She stayed a week and a half or 2 weeks longer, so she saw much more than even we did during our short time there. But she's going to be going around the country as well to other cities to tell the folks L.A. and around the United States what she saw.
And have you written all that you're going to write relevant to your trip now?
Well, it's always, there's always more information that comes into me even after one of these. So I've gotten much more information from various sources, pursue this angle, pursue that angle. And there are an awful lot of more angles to pursue, especially the money situation. One of the things that was emphasized to me in Tripoli is one of the first things the rebels did when they seized control of Benghazi is they looted 900 Libyan dinars cash out of the Libyan Central Bank in Benghazi and $500.5 US in cash. That money gone. Now the rebels want the frozen Libyan government assets unfrozen and distributed to them. So we see moves in Congress to do that. Even our Treasury Department is reluctant to do that after they saw squander the cash out of the central bank. The last thing they want to do now is to unfreeze the Libyan assets and give it to these people. Because these rebels, by and large, are essentially crooks. They're no different than all the other crooked people like Ahmed Shalabi, the Iraqi National Congress, this national con man, and also a bank robber in his own right from Jordan. What did we hear the other day? That $18 billion in cash lost in Iraq. It just lost. The Pentagon it had the money, and the same thing is going on in Libya. But we know this has happened before with the money wasted on Contras. Everywhere we go, in Afghanistan now with warlords, money being lost. And hopefully this information will heavily on Congress when they decide, and hopefully decide, to cut off all future military aid for this military action in Libya.
Well, it's like they've got their aid right there in what they've stolen.
By and large, what happens to this money is it doesn't go to the rebel movement. It goes into the Swiss bank accounts of these rebel leaders, some of whom were sitting in McLean, Virginia, North Virginia, for a couple of decades working for the CIA, just waiting for this moment to go back into Libya. And it's these people who are trying to take over the rebel movement.
So who within the government is on the side? Who can we contact and give support to?
Well, there was the initial resolution in the House of Representatives to cut off money was sponsored by Dennis Kucinich. So people should contact Kucinich's office and give him full support. Also on the Republican side, this sounds odd, but many of the Tea Party people who were elected for, I think, probably the wrong reason, are now saying, hey, we don't want to get in this war. We have no business being in this war. So on this issue, maybe the only issue they happen to be right on, but they even say a broken clock right twice a day.
Right.
But there have been other Republicans who have been against this. Walter Jones, who represents Fort Bragg in North Carolina, is against this war. He's been against wars because he thinks it happens. These guys come back, maimed, injured, dead, so there's people like Ron Paul, there's people like Walter Jones, and then we have Dennis Kucinich and others on the Democratic side, and even Speaker Boehner has made threats to cut off the money. So in this respect, maybe he needs to get a little bit of encouragement to go ahead and do so and not make side deals.
But
with the
is it
White House.
real? Are they really in?
Well, we never know whether they're playing, because we know that Boehner and Obama played golf, the other day. I'm always a great critic of golf because of the deals that are out on the golf course. And we don't know what kind of side deals, but as long as he's publicly stating that, he should be forced this. We should force his hands. If he says, this is an illegal war, that the War Powers Act, he's always been against the War Powers Act in the past, but now he says he's a great proponent of the War Powers Act. As long as we got him now on that issue, let's hold his feet to the fire. He is the speaker. He can get votes. And let's get at least the House to cut off the funding for this war. That's the only way we're going to see any action. The House controls the purse strings.
Great information. Again, you're listening here to More Room on the Outside. This is DCTV in Washington, D.C. You're participating, in fact, in an interview with Mr. Wayne Madsen, who recently returned from Libya and is sharing with us his experience, his knowledge about what's really going on over there. When we come back, we're going to ask Wayne about the other countries that are supporting the right side, supporting what should be done, and supporting the humanitarian effort there in Libya. Again, my name is Dr. Baruch. I'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Washington. Okay, thank you. يقول الله معمر الله يقول الله معمر وليبيا وبس الله ومعمر بس والله معمر قدافي 100 والله معمر قدافي 100 معمر and Libya only.
Can I talk? Quick message to Mr. Obama. Please make love, don't make war. We are peaceful people and we are looking for peaceful way out of this problem. Thank you.
Yes, that's right.
He was very happy for what you said.
شعب ليبي شعب صامت، انت حتكون صرصور نفسه عليك عبر التاريخ.
استنى شوية بس. نو اوباما نو.
More room on the outside. Again, we're talking to Wayne Madsen, who's recently visited into the continent of Africa, the country of Libya, where it is being war-torn by NATO and the United States of America and other countries who have interest there. As I listened to the children, which can't help but touch you, as I have 4 children, you know, those children were saying something with a lot of energy. Do you know what they were saying?
Well, the chant you heard was Allah Muammar Libya Abes. Means God, Muammar Gaddafi, Libya, and that's all we want. That's all we need. You know, particularly NATO hands off. I think the lady in the clip who was saying something about Obama was saying hands off Libya. But this is what you hear on the street. These aren't government shills. These demonstrations are late at night after people get off from work, so they're not paid by the government to be there. Actually, the Libyan compound where we're at, I was with Cynthia McKinney in 2009 for the 40th anniversary of the Libyan Revolution, and that was not really to get into that compound. The security was very tight. Now it's been opened up for these people to go see the destruction caused by the recurring NATO attacks. And these people are basically there as human shields saying, you know, here, you know, go ahead, you want to attack, we're here. So, and the attack will continue not far from the location. But one of the things they have actually there is a museum in memory of the 86 attack on Tripoli when Reagan ordered the attack that killed Gaddafi's adopted daughter. So that's one of the museums there. I'm not sure if that museum has been hit since we left. I'm sure that would be a favorite target for NATO to try to take that.
Sure. And these bombings are taking place pretty much every night, or was that
every night? And then after we left, it was during the day, so it was constant day and night bombardment of Tripoli, and then there was an increase in attacks on residential areas. So we saw NATO finally having that they killed civilians in a residential area in Tripoli and one to the east of Tripoli.
You talked to us about the countries that are in support of this action that is taking place there, the military action against Gaddafi and his country. What about the countries that are not in support of it?
Well, we had the Arab League initially say they passed a resolution stating that they were in favor of this, but very few Arab countries were even represented at that meeting. This was really something that was engineered by Jordan and Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, Baruch, and a few others. And now we have the Secretary General of the Arab League saying this was in error. We didn't want this NATO attack, and the African Union has been very strong. Maybe they should be stronger, but against this NATO attack, they want negotiations, which the U.S. and NATO has rejected. But now we see Italy breaking from the coalition. Italians, who have a very nasty legacy as a colonial power in Libya, are now saying they want a ceasefire. They're saying to get humanitarian aid into the country, but it's quite clear the Italians may be the first to break ranks. The Germans abstained on the Security Council resolution. Libya felt really betrayed by 3 members of the Security Council that are members of the African Union: South Africa, Gabon, Nigeria. When in fact China Russia, India, Brazil, and Germany, a NATO country, abstained. These 3 African countries voted in favor of the Security Council resolution that Obama and Cameron of England and Sarkozy of France took it as authorization for the military action. And Jacob Zuma has gone to Libya to try to negotiate a ceasefire with Gaddafi. Gaddafi, after all Libya did for the African National Congress during the apartheid era in support, Gaddafi feels personally betrayed by Jacob Zuma and his ANC leadership in South Africa for voting for that resolution. We now found out later that President Obama himself called Zuma to personally urge him to vote in favor of that Security Council resolution.
President who encouraged who?
President Obama encouraged President
of
Zuma
the United States. President Obama of the United States encouraged
President Zuma of South Africa to vote.
The one that most of us voted for out there.
Yes, to vote yes for, and now Gaddafi and hit close to him say all the development money that was given by Libya to these various countries, all the assistance money during the dark days of apartheid, this is how we're paid back.
So what do we do now? What is the best step forward for those of us who see this and realize it's wrong and want to do something to support what's right or engage and actively participate in righting this wrong, that you can correct what's been done, but that we stop this atrocity? What can we do?
Well, I think the only thing that the House has the power over the purse strings. Now that there's this surge of interest in maybe cutting funding, they're saying, well, it wouldn't be a full cutoff. And we hear this same old meme, oh, we can't cut off the money because it'll put our troops in harm's way. Well, if we have no troops in Libya, we're talking about people on those Navy ships, those aircraft carriers, at those air bases in Europe where these planes are taking off from, where these drones are being launched from. That's not going to put the troops in harm's way. So there's a move now to disengage the United States from anything other than maybe participation in search and rescue activities and intelligence. I think that should be banned too. But it's a move in the right direction. So if we can at least cut off the money for the bombs and the drone attacks, which says the U.S. can't participate in this direct military action, that would be at least a move in the right direction.
So what country is going to make sure, because we're getting the news from these mediums that are telling lies already, so what country is going to stand and make sure that this doesn't continue?
Well, I mean, as far as the media, one thing I should add is Al Jazeera has really been helping to stoke the anti-Gaddafi claims.
Why is that? I thought Al Jazeera...
Well, remember, Qatar owns Al Jazeera. Qatar is a member of the coalition. They're flying combat missions. They're playing against Libya right now. So they also got to market the oil from eastern Libya, the rebel territory, that's now being marketed internationally by Qatar. So so Al Jazeera, we have to look at them, in the perspective that they're funded by the Qatar government. Qatar government is a belligerent with NATO in this operation against Libya, but there are outlets. There's certainly RT, used to be called RT, has done some pretty good independent reporting out of Libya, and there's other media reporting independently. I would add just the Dignity delegation. These clips were put out to the independent media. So the Pacifica stations, WPFW, has been reporting on what's been going on in Libya.
Why, you talk about human shields, and I can remember the human shields back maybe, I don't remember what war it was that America was engaged in, where the first instance I heard of these human shields concept. Why is it that those of us, and because some pretty diehard peace advocates here in the United States of America, why is it that we can't go?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's kind of an arduous journey right now because of the air embargo. You can't fly into Tripoli. You've got to go by land. It's expensive, but the Libyan government would welcome anyone to come there right now. It's just getting people interested who have time and really you're putting your life in jeopardy by going in. It's a war zone. It's an active war zone. There's no doubt about it. The aftermath of the NATO strikes, we experienced the bombings. That's when they were all night long, and now they're all day long. So, and now there's that the French and British have assassination teams in Libya who are going to try to assassinate Muammar Gaddafi. So There's maybe 150 of them, according to some reports. That could be propaganda, too, because the worst thing about the war, this is a war of lies. This is a propaganda war. So all the things we heard about Gaddafi, and including this report that Libyan troops were being issued Viagra and they were raping Libyan women, absolutely no. There was no proof of that, even though that was reported by the Western media. And even the UN Human Rights Commission stated there was no proof of this. Mm-hmm. This was coming out of people like the International Criminal Court, which has indicted Gaddafi. They're building up an argument. They're building up the prosecution, no matter how flimsy it is. And so the biggest thing is this is a war of propaganda. This is what's called an information war. And normally they say the first casualty of war is the truth. Now it's like really it's the casualty of the truth. It's on steroids because we can't believe anything we read in the New York Times, Washington Post. And they've got these reporters in Tripoli that are putting out absolute disinformation. If I have time, just one quick thing. I was on Libyan State TV, and it was a target. It may be a target. It hasn't been hit as far as we know yet. I was saying basically some of these things on Libyan State TV, what we had experienced. And the New York Times reporter called the host of the show and said, "Are you broadcasting from a bunker?" No, we were in a normal studio. So this is what the New York Times reporter in Tripoli was trying to, he knows that's not the case, but this is what he was trying to insinuate.
Wow. So you said that we're going to be blessed with having Cynthia McKinney, the Honorable Cynthia McKinney, here in the D.C. area tomorrow evening, in fact.
Tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock, Festival Center in the Adams Morgan area.
Okay, and there'll be footage from what it is possibly?
I'm sure, yes, I'm sure they'll be showing the footage there, and she'll be talking about her experiences. Probably some of the rest of us in the D.C. area on that trip will be there as well. I know I'll be there, and we'll certainly be telling people what we saw and experienced firsthand.
When I sent out some notices about who I was interviewing and what I was talking about, I got a comment back, aren't you concerned for your life? Me.
Yeah.
I'm concerned for my life. I said, well, I'm more concerned for the truth. And I wasn't even thinking about, my concern for my life. That they said, well, if they would do to Libya, you're nothing. They could wipe you out in a minute and shut you up, and then you wouldn't be able to do what you're doing. I said, well, until I can't do what I'm doing, I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing. And I ask you, how do you feel? Your passport is Libya.
Yeah, yeah, it's there
yep.
Twice.
Right, and I'm sure you're in a whole lot of files and whatever, and they pulled up all your information. They're tracking where your cell phone is and what your computer's doing. So,
absolutely.
How do you feel about that?
Well, again, I mean, if we're afraid of this job, I wouldn't do it. But I think it has to be done.
Sure.
When I went into Rwanda, it was because no one was reporting the truth there.
Wow.
All we heard was, this terrible massacre was carried out after this plane crashed due to an accident. I said, no, none of this makes sense. So I went into Rwanda, I went into Uganda, and found out for myself what was going on. The reason is all the people who have died before that time and have died after. They had no advocates here, and sometimes you can almost hear the voices. You have to go and get the truth out because they're not able to do it. And let's face it, the media in this country, whether it's Libya, Rwanda, the Horn of Africa, has a huge blind spot for Africa. They really don't. The publishing houses as well. So when I wrote my book, I had trouble finding a publisher because they said, nobody reads books about Africa.
Right.
This is a continent with a diverse culture, a culture that has impacted American history, and there's 800 million people on the continent, but it's like it doesn't exist. It's like you look at a map and to these corporate people, it doesn't exist. It's not there.
That's right. Again, it's been a pleasure interviewing you, and it's been a pleasure being in front of you there in the viewing audience and those of us who are listening to this program. Please, if you capture this on YouTube, send it out to everybody and anybody you know. This has been More Room on the Outside. I'm your host, Dr. Baruch. We'll be back again with more insightful truth that you're not getting from the other guys. Have a good
against the people of Libya and Africa. Dark skin under the pretext of African mercenaries fighting alongside Libyan armed forces. The accusations resemble the accusations of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and not a single mercenary was shown on the cameras of such channels, despite allegations made concerning the capture of mercenaries. Rather, what happened was the opposite. This is one of the soldiers that lived in the city of El Ajelat, 80 kilometers west of Tripoli. His name was Hisham Ashushan, who appeared on a Al Jazeera satellite channel being presented as a mercenary who was treated without any mercy. He was hanged on a bridge in public place in the city of El Bayda, 200 kilometers east of Benghazi. And in spite of an interview with his family, the world continued to turn a blind eye. Rebels' accusation did not stop at accusing dark-skinned Libyans of being mercenaries. Rather, they accused citizens of the other African nations. The number of Africans in Libya prior to the crisis has reached more than 1 million. This is by the testimony of Africans who migrated from Libya to Egypt. They were being captured in Benghazi and Al-Qaeda to force them to wear Libyan military uniform and confess they were mercenaries. The false media report international resolution started and identified 82% of the Libyan population. The devastating NATO bombardment, as if the percentage of the population were Libyans to whom human rights does not apply. In spite of taking to the streets in the thousands on a daily basis against the bombardment, protesters failed to convince they were of the mankind that feel pain when a victim falls, just as others do. Cities that were no longer under the control of the state spiraled into chaos. Rifles and tanks became a common scene in the main streets and in the absence of security apparatus. And with the release of prisoners, crime spread, such as violations, kidnapping, rape, the execution of detainees, and armed rebels committed crimes against humanity. In the square of the city of Masrata, 200 kilometers east of Tripoli, after controlling the city, rebels committed heinous crimes by cutting the limbs of a soldier. They cut off his heart and trampled it. In Benghazi, east of Libya, the situation was not better. Rebels committed cold-blooded crimes. A war prisoner was cut in pieces. The heinous crimes which were carried out in the public square was opposite to the Benghazi court, the seat of the Transitional National Council. These images document the execution of Libyan soldiers after being tortured and decapitated by sword. All of this work is beginning to carry out in the building next to the court, where the information indicated that the basement of the building was being used as a prison, closed for interrogation and torture until death. The city of Al-Bayda, 200 kilometers east of Benghazi, not spared from such crimes against humanity, which included the execution of and the capture of Libyan soldiers. Following an interrogation for a few minutes, the execution was Al-Qaeda style. Despite the spread of such images on the internet, a single satellite channel which propagated the fabrication aired the crimes. Rebels are continuing to commit more crimes, and not a single condemning voice by the right organization was raised, which one finds strange. Researchers looking into the crisis and causes realize that Libya, as the rest of the Arab and Islamic nation, has suffered from the emergence of extremist groups and waged a fierce war against which reached climax in the 1990s, and the matter ended up by crushing activities of such groups. However, it seems that the sleeper cells were present. Libyan authorities were not only confined to resolving the matter through security measures. An initiative by Gaddafi charity organization commenced dialogue with the leaders of these groups, whether it was those that captured or those that returned from Afghanistan, Iraq, or Guantanamo. The dialogue resulted in the declaration by the leadership of the combatant Islamic group to end violence once and for all. A significant intellectual book known as the Intellectual Reference, and for the course of the last 2 years, 705 members of the group were released. In groups, the last group, consisting 105 members, were released on the 15th of February 2011, coinciding with the beginning of the event. However, have they really refuted violence? The semblance of and the rituals and appearance alone did not indicate the presence of extremism among the ranks of the armed rebels. In addition to the method of fighting, execution on a mass scale were carried out under religious slogans characterized by QAIDA. Also, religious dialogue was attempted while instigating killing during attacks against cities resembled the approach. However, the images is more apparent when these groups established control over some cities. Abdul Hakim al-Hassani, leader of the combatant Islamic group, declared himself near of the city of Derna, 300 kilometers east of Benghazi. He was assisted by Qumu, who returned from Afghanistan in a former Guantanamo detention agency. In addition, reports in American and European newspapers.
Photo investigation